As a hobbyist, what do you do with time off? Indulge your base nerdiness at home? Or go and see the world as society constantly seems to want you to do? This is a dilemma that plagued me for years. But with the van, I no longer have to choose. I can be a toy soldier obsessive dork anywhere, as long as there's a road to get me there. But how productive a hobbyist can I actually be on the road? There is, of course, only one way to find out. So I would spend one holiday painting an incursion-sized force of Aeldari for Warhammer 40,000. I'd be playing a game on the way back against my nemesis Chris Powell, and I could only take what I'd finished. So the race was very much on. We started on a drizzly day by heading north to the Lake District in Cumbria. The plan for this holiday was to seek out some of Britain's best Roman history. From Caesar's botched invasions to the usurper Emperor Constantine III's panicked withdrawal to reinforce the Rhine, 400 years of occupation left a fascinating and indelible mark on Britain. No corner of the island went completely untouched, so this trip would take me to England, Scotland, and Wales. However, I start here in Cumbria by crossing Lake Windermere, the biggest lake in the Lake District, to get one step closer to my first Roman stop of the holiday. But before that, I heard that some of that English weather might have been following me up from the south, so I took refuge in the tranquil Skyside campsite. Whiling away the hours waiting for that weather to clear was the perfect opportunity to introduce you to the project I'll be doing on this holiday.
Are faring space elves, the Eldar or Aeldari. Now I've brought with me a couple of boxes to start with of Guardians.
The Aeldari are Warhammer 40,000's space elves, essentially. A bit like the Romans, they once had an ancient, gigantic empire, the mightiest empire known at the time. Unlike the Roman Empire, which of course degraded over many hundreds of years through succession crises, civil wars, corruption and infighting, the Aeldari Space Empire was at its apex right before it exploded. There are similarities between the two and we'll get to those. For the moment, I'm just constructing my Aeldari Guardians, the space elven citizenry who take up arms in extreme circumstances to defend their homes. This is a reasonably new kit from Games Workshop, an update on the classic old designs that I've had sat in my cabinet for the past 2 decades. They were reasonably simple to put together, but it really takes it out of me. I hate building, and so I was relieved when it was done and I could hit the hay. The next day, with the weather cleared, it was time to head over the Cumbrian Fells for my first Roman stop of the holiday. Little did I know that that would involve some of the most intense driving I have ever done. The actual proper name of this road is The Struggle. Extremely ominous. So far it all seemed tame enough, but I was heading for 2 roads which are each notorious in their own right. Windham Pass and the even more difficult Hardknott Pass. But first, the real challenge. Other drivers. I don't understand. Behind me, there is nothing but a narrow, single-track road for about a mile. Behind them, there is a large passing place. Figuring out how to reverse into it was apparently a real struggle. Finally, with the road clear, we were underway, and we were ready for the next challenge to begin. Warning sign cautioned of a narrow route, severe bends, and a 30-degree incline. The van does a bit feel like it might break apart at any moment. So we're at 25% incline at the moment. But at its steepest, it's 30%. 1 in 3. And it's just so narrow. For comfort, I clung to the view that, well, if these cows can make it, then surely the van can. It's not a theory that held out all that long. Bloody hell. Bloody hell. This is... Ah! Oh my god! Oh my god! Sorry, not the best camera work there, but I was really quite focused on keeping the van on the road. Which I did. I need a breather. We're done with what I think is Windham Pass, or however it's pronounced. But I'm pretty sure this silvery trail going almost right up the cliffside in front of me That's Hardknott Pass. The final boss. Whoa. Whoa. I'm actually trying to foot down, rally it around here, and I'm not worried. I'm convinced that if I stop, I won't start again. There's no way I would get around those corners from stationary in this van. Oh, another one's coming. Pothole! Oh, the size of a... Oh! Ah! The size of a... arse, I guess. Jesus, fuck. On my arm. Jesus Christ, look at this. Oh my God. That was 1 in 3 then. I actually just didn't think the van would make it. And there's plenty more where that came from. Oh my God. The other side was easier on the clutch, but no easier on the butt cheeks, which, to be honest, were clenched tight at this point. I was worried that if I didn't judge these corners right, I'd just get stuck there. No way. The cameras never capture the perspective to tell you just how steep this was, but I did get the sense that this road wasn't built for camper vans. Genuinely quite scary, this. Genuinely quite scary. It's like that bit before a roller coaster drops. Oh my God. Eventually, and somehow in one piece, we arrived at the remote Roman fort of Hardknott Pass. I was excited to explore, but England decided that would have to wait. I guess I do keep insisting on going on autumnal Northern England holidays, and I've probably lost the right to complain. Once it had finally cleared up, I took full advantage of the beautiful sun by preparing to spray paint my toys. Unfortunately, whilst the rain had gone, the wind continued to make things difficult. Oh, that didn't work. That didn't work as I'd hoped. Oh, I think what we're going to have to do is find somewhere more sheltered down in the valley. We parked up in the woods, but I can't do anything until the rain stops. And even then, it seems like we're going to have a slim window of opportunity. It's raining again. There's just nothing you can do. I did basically get them done before heading back up the hill to the fort, but there were immediately some problems. The first is that the spray had come out very chalky and rough. Now this could have been due to the moisture in the air, however it is a problem I've had with this particular brand of white spray before. Second, and perhaps more critically, I'd lost one of the guardians from one of the 2 squads. Kiwi and I searched in the van and out, but came up empty-handed. Still, I was finally ready enough to do a bit of painting and go see the fort. Well, maybe not. Once that bout had subsided, I decided to race out before the next one hit us. I felt I should have a good chunk of time, as long as nothing else went wrong. Oh, bloody hell. Get that, dude. This fort sits in a commanding position, with amazing views down the valley to the sea and at the gateway to Hardknott Pass, which was a vital route for travel and trade. Known then as Media Bogdom, it was initially occupied for only a decade before being abandoned, and then reoccupied for 200 years. I did try to recount more interesting facts while I was there, but I didn't wear the windshield on my microphone with predictable results.
You can see why they chose this location for it. Despite the wind and the rain, the view is commanding right down the valley to the sea.
The fort was strategically positioned both so the Romans could keep an eye on the locals down in the valley, and also control the vital route through Hardknott Pass, which has existed since their occupation.
Oh my god.
Anyway, on with the painting. My Craftworld Aeldari are of the Bile Tan variety, the most warlike and expansionist. The colours are white, which the spray can had taken care of, and green. I've been collecting Eldar for about 23 years, although I have remarkably little to show for it. For me, the Craftworlders have always been one of the more interesting factions in Warhammer 40,000. They are neither entirely good nor entirely evil. They are tortured by the legacy of their empire and the wrongs committed to build it, and they now have to face the tough moral and practical problems to stop their dwindling race from dying out entirely. With the day dragging on, I return to the van for an underwhelming cup of dinner, and to finish off the green, both on the Guardians and the hero of my army, their leader, the Autarch. Meanwhile, the sun dwindled and Cumbria threw me one more meteorological curveball in the form of this spectacular sunset.
So I've churned through the green on these guys, and I was feeling very proud of myself because it's basically the only other colour on most of them except for a bit of skin, hair and black eyes and gems. But then I realised that I've got this guy, the Autarch, the leader, and in typical War Games fashion, you know he's the leader because he's got all the bling on him. And so now I've got to do all the base colours on all the bling.
For those not in the know, the Autarchs are the Aeldari career generals, if you like. They've walked the path of command for so long they've become lost on it. They may lead the armies of the Aeldari for thousands of years, making them superlative strategists. Only those which have mastered every aspect of warfare can call themselves an Autarch, unlike many of the Aeldari leaders, who become fixated on just a single aspect. They are especially important to Craftworld Bile Tan, who believe that the path to salvation lies in rebuilding their lost empire. Which does kind of suggest they've just not learned anything. My Autarch is armed with a warp jump generator, which allows him to teleport over short distances, as well as a spear for poking things, and a fusion gun for melting them. We got his base colours done, slept, and the next day, we were on the move. Having seen Hardknott Roman Fort, the logical next place to go was Hadrian's Wall. But before I could leave the Lake District, I had a quick, exhausting detour to make. You see, Hardknott Pass lies in the shadow of England's tallest mountain, Scafell Pike. Now I know that people from places with genuinely high mountains like France or the fastest Montes region of Mars will scoff. They'll recognise that being England's tallest mountain is a bit like being the world's most formidable guinea pig. Not unimpressive, but more a curiosity than a real challenge. Still, the point remains that if I climb it and paint Warhammer, then I'll be the highest person at that time painting Warhammer in England, and unless anyone else has painted Warhammer at the top of Scafell Pike, the highest person ever painting Warhammer in England. But that would have to wait until tomorrow. In the meantime, it was just time to slap some washes on these miniatures, get them ready for some more detailed painting later. This day was peak van holiday. Beautiful September sunshine, nice easy painting stage, exquisite views and a campsite with real functioning toilets. It was almost enough to calm my nerves even with the terror of pending physical exertion. We set off early the next day, with the route beginning at the campsite itself. The route begins by following this river of crystal clear mountain water. Soon enough the incline kicks in earnest, and the dog made it look so easy. As you ascend, for the first hour or so you get beautiful views out over this lake, which, for some reason, and I'm not making this up, is called wastewater. I did try my best to get nice shots, but the dog made it exceedingly difficult.
Stay. Kiwi. Out the way. Good. Out the way more.
The climb gave me plenty of time to reflect on my connection to my hobby project for this holiday.
The Eldar are meant to be lithe, graceful, and ageless, which makes it appropriate that I'm doing this challenge as the definitive opposite of all those things. Ooh. It's now become a race against time to see what will happen first. Will I scale the mountain, or will my shoes disintegrate?
Apologies, there is a prolonged shot of the dog's butthole here, but if you were busy painting or scrolling on your phone and you looked up when I mentioned the dog's butthole, that says more about you than it does about me.
I really thought this last peak was it, but there's a whole bloody another one. That, to be honest, has been emblematic of my attitude towards this whole hike, is every time we crest a ridge, I get frustrated because I can see that we're still ascending, despite the fact I've got absolutely no right to be frustrated, because of course, that's the definition of the challenge I decided to take on. I decided to climb a mountain, so... Oh, God.
Eventually I did find a summit that didn't give way to another one, and I arrived at the peak of Scafell Pike. As far as being a spot to sit and paint miniatures, it was hard to find a better one. This isn't a view that England is typically known for. A wide, open-floored valley, a long, winding river snaking through it, and no human development to blemish the landscape anywhere.
Right, we've had lunch, and I've checked around, and there's no one else painting Warhammer up here, as you'd expect, which means I'm about to be the highest person in England painting Warhammer, at least at the moment, and potentially ever. In fact, unless I can find evidence to the contrary, I'm going to assume ever. A world record.
It's actually a national record at best, but even then, not one I expect to get certified. In any event, I got painting, but the dog didn't give me much space for it. Apparently climbing a mountain isn't enough walkies to give me a moment's peace.
Such a dickhead. I'm so stylish, and I can't believe I brought these things to the top of Scafell Pike. Sick.
I finally settled into a nice rhythm, and I was enjoying starting to highlight the greens, moving slowly up through the shades as it's the only colour on some of these models, and I wanted to make it pop. The dog, clearly impatient, managed to torpedo that calm with pinpoint precision.
Key, that's my... Almost all my brush washing water's gone.
That deserves a replay. Look at the flawless execution.
I don't have any spare. Oh, bloody hell, dog.
Imagine bothering to drag paints and miniatures up a mountain just to have your dog snipe out the water pot.
Can I still... There's a little bit left.
I utilised the remaining water sparingly, continuing to add lighter greens to that mix and building up the colour. Soon enough though, the slither of water left in the pot was more paint than water. So I packed up, ready for the return journey. I finally made it back to the van exhausted, having taken quite a nasty, proper head over heels tumble on the mountain.
Do you know what the really annoying thing about that fall was? It's the fact that I didn't film it. Because when I did the Hebrides video, I fell over while speaking to camera and I refilmed it. But then when I came to edit it, I thought, you know, I'll put the fall in because it's a bit of fun and the information I was going to impart, I can put in other parts of the video. So, you know, no harm. And then when I came to look at the analytics in the video, it showed that that part where I fell, there was a very distinct spike. That was the most watched part of the video, which means people had not only watched it, they then watched it again and again and again. So now, when I fell over on the mountain and I was in some pain and thinking, oh my God, am I going to need rescuing? The first thing that went through my head was, I didn't film it. That's what's happened to me. Is that now, risk to my bodily integrity is a question of content rather than safety. And that's what you guys want. You say you don't want to be baited, but all evidence is to the contrary. Because, let's face it, if I took the injury on my leg and instead had it on my face, all gashed up, and that was the thumbnail, and the title was, I busted up my face painting Warhammer, you'd have clicked on that so much more quickly than you clicked on whatever this title and thumbnail actually ends up being. And then you just scroll through the bottom to pinpoint the moment where the injury happens, and you'd have clicked on that, watched that bit, and then you're on to the next thing. You don't want 50 minutes of history and painting and stories. You want a 20-second TikTok of a guy face planting, and the more pain, the better. It's sadistic.
I'd like to apologise for that small existential crisis, and certainly for implying that any of you might be sadists.
Okay, dog has walked and she's now made a burrow for herself. You can just see her tail sticking out. So it's time for us to crack on. I'm going to start by finishing the green that I failed to finish on the mountain.
Finishing the greens just meant highlighting them up, using a little bit of yellow at the end, and then using a dark turquoise wash as a glaze to get some cool colour back in the recesses. And then it was time to start painting the whites, and I really wanted it to be livelier and a bit colder than simply grey on grey. You'll note that cold is a theme in this scheme, so I started shading down the shadows with, well, grey to start with, but then a lighter turquoise. These guys are going to have snowy bases, and I thought this might look like it's reflecting the bluey hue of the ice. I accept it looks a bit odd until you start highlighting, then it all really starts to come together. At least that's what I hope. You might still think it looks odd. The next day I'd be hopping over to Hadrian's Wall, but there was one stop I had to make along the way. You see, it takes a lot of stone to build a 73-mile wall, and in 122 AD, shipping it long distance wasn't really an option. So the Romans needed somewhere nearby to excavate it. That meant a trip to a local ancient quarry.
The quarry still exists, although the path collapsed 30 years ago, which means I can't access it, which is unfortunate because the archaeological research in the area found inscriptions including Roman names, messages to loved ones, and also drawings of penises, which goes to show that the modus operandi of graffiti artists hasn't evolved in 2,000 years. Remarkably, when archaeologists uncovered that quarry, they discovered something even more important than hilarious 2,000-year-old penis drawings. They discovered evidence as to the scale of the operation that built Hadrian's Wall. We need to remember that when the Romans came to what's now England, they thought it was some mystical land full of esoteric dooms such as giants. Caesar struggled to get his men to even board their ships.
Given that, it's not surprising they'd go to lengths to protect themselves from what might lay beyond, in the Scottish wildernesses. Giants aside, they found the Caledonian tribes scary enough.
While Hadrian's Wall doesn't actually sit on the border between England and Scotland, it's very close. And England essentially became Roman, but Scotland never really did. The Romans did advance further to the Antonine Wall, but they couldn't hold it. They fell back to Hadrian's Wall. So for much of its life, it represented the northernmost frontier of the Roman Empire.
This is the River Gelt, flowing through the Gelt Woods, home to the Gelt Quarry and the Gelt Roman inscriptions.
It does seem remarkable now that where I'm standing was at one point this wild, untamed frontier, or at least as the Romans would tell it. I mean, let's bear in mind, they built that wall because they saw an enemy on the other side. Before the Romans arrived, there was no concept of England and Scotland. I do find it interesting to think about what social, cultural and nationalistic ideas were promulgated by the construction of the wall rather than resolved by it. We know at least that trade across the area where the wall went up fell dramatically. So it wasn't just about keeping out barbarians and marauding forces. It was about a sense of societal control as well, or at least that's the effect that it had.
After I'd gone on about it long enough, Kiwi and I headed back to the van to head to the wall proper. And so we arrive at what was for a very long time Rome's northernmost frontier, Hadrian's Wall. Now, far be it from me to tell the Romans their business, but if the 70-foot sheer cliff wasn't going to stop the barbarians, what was the 10-foot wall on top going to do? 3 separate legions were involved with building the wall, and almost as soon as it was finished, they were off north building the Antonine Wall. But from 155 to 158, the legions that built the walls were inundated by revolting tribes in England. They suffered casualties so profound they had to be reinforced from legions on the continent.
Another steep one.
It's ironic, really. The Historia Augustus records that Hadrian built the wall to try and keep the barbarians separate from the Romans. In reality, he just locked them in together.
You'll see the sections of the wall are missing, and much of what is left is a little over 3 feet. And that's because a few hundred years ago, much of the wall was pillaged for local farm buildings. So the bricks are still here, somewhere, just not necessarily in the right place.
This area continues to make history today and is the site of one of Britain's fiercest recent controversies, the Sycamore Gap Tree. Now, I appreciate if you live outside the UK, you won't have heard of it, and this section probably won't make much sense to you, but if you live in the UK, you can't have missed it. Where now there stands a wooden cordon, there once stood a proud sycamore tree. Now, I know it probably sounds very, very British and also a bit weird to fall into a state of national hysteria over the unlawful felling of a tree, no matter how beautiful. But this tree stood as an emblem for an entire region of the country. It won 2016 England Tree of the Year award. It had a prominent role in 1991's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. It undoubtedly achieved more in its life than I ever did, and it was a tree.
You've got to go up.
Anyway, after hefting the dog over some country walls, I set up to paint by a quaint and secluded little spot of the wall. However, this time I'd forgotten to bring water with me, and I can't blame that on the dog. That was a shame, because it was such a beautiful day and such a beautiful spot, but it did mean I had to head back to the van. It was then time for me to head even further north, because whilst Hadrian's Wall was, for the majority of its life, the northern frontier, it wasn't for the entirety of its life. The Romans also built the Antonine Wall, which crossed from the Firth of Forth, basically where Edinburgh is today, across to the mouth of the Clyde, just north of where Glasgow is today. I certainly can't blame the Romans for trying to reach beautiful Highland Scotland, although it didn't go particularly well. Built only 20 years after Hadrian's Wall, and unlike Hadrian's Wall, it was made from turf and wood. It had 16 full forts and more smaller forts, and a road to facilitate troop movements, but despite all of this, it was held for only 8 years. However, I was heading even further north than the Antonine Wall, because whilst it formed the northernmost frontier, it was not the most northerly point the Romans reached. To explore that story, I'd headed into the Grampian Mountains and camped out on the shores of Loch Linnhe, where I was treated to what I think might be the most extraordinary sunset I've ever seen in my life. The view in the morning wasn't half bad either. Given this was September Scotland, I'd clearly struck gold. Staked out in this beautiful little green spot, just a few minutes drive from Fort William. After all, I'd already climbed England's highest mountain. What if I could be the highest person in the UK painting Warhammer? That requires another mountain climb.
So we're at a beautiful little picnic spot just outside Fort William, which is the town that sits at the foot of Ben Nevis. And we've got a day to kill, so it's time to do the painting that I was supposed to do by Hadrian's Wall and get ready for the special little bit of detail that I want to do at the summit of Ben Nevis tomorrow, assuming I make it.
I started by painting my Autarch's warp jump generator, the backpack she wears to slip in and out of real space and get the drop on her enemies. Getting any kind of visual interest out of a big flat white surface is always difficult. I followed the same recipe as I did on the Guardian's armour, just being very careful to try and build up the highlights slowly.
Right, there's now only 2 steps left, and mercifully they're quick ones.
The first of those steps was to edge highlight, and the second was to put a very careful black line in the recesses. It was then onto the greens, following the same recipe as I'd used on the Guardian's helmets, but leaving the cloak blank for now. That's a fair bit of green on this miniature, and this work continued whilst the dog sat so very patiently with her ball. I rewarded her with a bit of attention.
Okay, Paul. Good girl. Now spin around. Good girl. Now sit. Now lie down. Good girl. Up. Good girl. Look, stay. That'll do.
After another outrageous sunset, it was time for an early start, the breakfast of champions, and a trip over to Ben Nevis. Still somewhat recovering from my trip up Scafell Pike, I was feeling a bit nervous.
Oh my god, here we go again. So we're about 10, 15 minutes in. Hoodie's had to come off, so it's very warm. T-shirt's getting a bit irritating, but you know, I'm looking out over this incredible landscape and just thinking, why? Why have I done this?
The answer to that question is, for some reason, to be the highest person in the UK painting Warhammer, as if that's any kind of answer at all. A slightly more respectable reason is that we're still tracing the steps of the Romans in Scotland. The northernmost the Romans reached was the Battle of Mons Graupus, but there have been many suggestions for where it might have taken place. Most of those focus in the Perth and Kinross area, or the northeast of Scotland, but the Grampian Mountains are one posited location, and I'm going to cling to that.
First collapse, about 10% of the way there. Didn't imagine the sweat. It'd be difficult with a sweat.
After a brief stop and a water break, we were on the road again, and I was starting to remember why I gave up the last time.
The path is mercifully evened out a bit, which is a relief because my shirt is made of sweat. The gilet is covered in sweat. Even the arms to my rucksack are coated in sweat. You know, my mum, she chastised me for wearing jeans. And she didn't right to do it. What a stupid thing to do.
About halfway up geographically, although much less than that in terms of effort, there's a waterfall, and it is the last chance to refill your drinking water. On this hot day, after this hot climb, it was about the most refreshing thing I've ever experienced. And loaded up with fresh water, oh, and fresh dog poo, because there's no bins to leave it on the mountain, I was ready for the rest of the climb.
So this is about as far as I got last time. So I guess in your face, old me. We've reached the horror show they call the zigzag. It's this awful, shingly ground cover, and it seems to go on forever. Less the Shire, more Mount Doom. It's times like this I resent people who say, you know, positive attitude, it's all in the head. It's not, is it? It's in the legs. Good 90% anyway. My head's fine. It's my legs. I've given up.
The hell of the zigzag finally gave way, and we were on the final ascent, just in time for the clouds to start to close in and ruin our view. Ben Nevis is the remains of a volcano that was active 350 million years ago, and it's the highest peak for nearly 800 kilometres in any direction. The peak itself is a boulder field, which makes it quite difficult to find a spot for lunch and painting. But that wouldn't dull the fact that we made it, and I was very proud of me and the dog. It was time to whap out the autarch and get on with a special bit of painting. Caerleon and Aeldari decorate their tanks and clothes and other bits and pieces with thorns. It's a lovely way of doing a straightforward bit of freehanding that can look fantastic and really sell the colour scheme. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to apply some to the autarch's cloak. I started sketching in the shapes with paint that was far too thick, rookie error, until I was interrupted by a man who'd spotted what I was doing. He told me that a friend of his was really into painting, and so he got him on the phone so that I could say hello.
Hey Ruben, I'm in Scotland. And where are we? You can explain where we are.
Top of Ben Nevis, Scotland's highest mountain. Just painting some miniatures. I understand that's your thing.
Anyway, I then cracked on with the thorns on the other side, which I did much more sensibly with a very thin coat of black. This makes it much more straightforward to get the shape you want while being able to go back and correct any errors. Speaking of errors, there are always plenty, and so it's back to green for the touch-ups. Just going back and forth between black and green until finally you have something resembling the shape you want. It's then time to very carefully pack away, because I'm not coming back up here for anything I've forgotten. And then take a last look at the summit before heading back down the mountain.
Good girl.
GPS connected.
Never again. Never again. My day was far from over though. If I was going to complete this project, climb the third mountain in the trio, and discover the rest of my Roman history, I needed to get south. A long way south. The mountain had taken its toll, and when I stopped for a break, I had to leave my dignity in the van. Not sure what's going on, but completely stationary now. Literally not moving an inch. Having put the horrors of the motorway behind me, and with the third country of this tour hoving into view, I decided it was time to make some serious progress and try to put this portion of the army behind me too. After highlighting the thorns to give them some volume, that meant playing my next little trick on the back of the cloak. I put gloss varnish on the central area, cut out a water transfer with the distinctive Bile Tan heart logo on it, applied that and put more varnish over the top of it, which meant I could now paint on it. Which is exactly what I did. Transfers often stick out like a sore thumb for being a single perfect tone of colour, when the paint around it has highlights, lowlights, and is just generally variable. So I use my transfers as a guide. As long as I can stay within the lines, it makes me look like a free-handing god, when I am not. I then had to just paint the cloak in around the vines and the logo. An effort, but I'm very pleased with the result. The pain wasn't over though. I still had to do the gold by glazing up the yellows and browns, and to be honest, I didn't do a very good job of it on this big round thing on his back. I wasn't careful enough about where the colour should go, and it's the highlights that make or break these things, and I was a bit clumsy. I also did the silver metal and the faces, which happily came out a bit nicer. Switching away from the little details, I did the inside of the cloak cream, and his hair a slightly different cream. With that, the painting on the autarch was finally done, and Kiwi and I were ready to hit up our next stop. We were in the Cotswolds in the Midlands, famous for its tea rooms, little stone walls, and iconic architecture. It is the romanticised notion of English quaintness distilled. It is also the home of Chedworth Roman Villa. It is an extraordinary example of the luxury in which some Romans found themselves living in Britain, complete with intricate mosaic floors, an underfloor central heating system, more mosaic floors, and more mosaic. I think mosaics were a big part of it, to be honest. It seems that having a mosaic for a floor was the height of Roman living. In fact, as I was wandering around, one of the main events appeared to be a little station where you could create your own mosaic, presumably for children. That doesn't stop me playing with toy soldiers. It certainly wasn't going to stop me here. But I wasn't going to copy the lame example they'd left out. I had something spicier in mind. There is more to this place than making silly pictures. For example, the villa revealed fascinating details about the end of the Roman period in Britain. It was often supposed that once the Romans left, society as they knew it essentially collapsed. Thus, like the flip of a switch, Roman civilization turned to the Dark Ages. But evidence suggests that luxury Roman-style living survived at Chedworth long after the Roman withdrawal. So we now understand that those who considered themselves culturally Roman declined over a period, rather than just simply going out overnight. Sadly, when they went, they took their technologies like underfloor heating with them, and it took us millennia to relearn them. Thank God we did before I was born.
We're here in the town of Newport, which hosts one of only 3 permanent legionary barracks that were present in the United Kingdom, and the only one in Europe that you can still explore. However, even this one won't be open until tomorrow because it's too late. So for the moment, I'm camping out in the car park of a temporarily closed Welsh tapas restaurant. Who knew? And I've got some hobby to be getting on with.
Tonight's job was to finish the Guardians. I've done the bodies and the heads, but they probably need arms to look right. The arms are still on sprue, so I've got a real task ahead of me. And seeing as how I'm a week into this holiday and I've finished only a single model, I need to get a real shift on. After preparing all the miniatures, cutting off the flash, gluing in the arms, etc., it was time to get them sprayed up in the dark.
I'm clipping back the excess frame from the gun so that the spray will get everywhere it needs to get, and also to make it easier for my chunky sausage fingers to get in those tight places when it comes to painting it. So, annoyingly, the paint has come out chalky again. And so again, I've got this rough texture. Turns out doing exactly the same thing as last time and hoping for a different outcome wasn't the winning strategy I had hoped.
Given I could now exclude humidity, I think it might have just been a Duff can. But the chalkiness did come off with some rubbing. And if you thought painting toy soldiers in the car park of a closed Welsh tapas restaurant was undignified, you ain't seen nothing yet. At least I was trying to keep clean, I suppose, in absence of a proper shower. After basing the weapons with a light grey blue, I washed them with a dark navy night blue, started highlighting up with some neutral greys, and deepening the shadow in the recesses. After an edge highlight, I'd managed to get this weird kind of wintry blue I was hoping for.
There's nothing worse than getting to the end of a paint job and then realising you've left a big painty fingerprint on the miniature. Or 2 in this case. I'd love to just say screw it and go to bed, but I won't be able to sleep now.
The pillows.
The next day at dawn, the dawn dawned as dawns are wont to do. I found myself with the day to spend in one of Britain's most Roman towns, Caerleon, which meant it promised a face full of history. I started at the amphitheatre, once of course a centre of entertainment for the legionaries stationed here. It could hold up to 6,000 people. It's a place where the soldiers could put behind the horrors of war by watching people tear each other apart.
However, perhaps its history isn't all that settled. According to a 12th century scholar, Geoffrey of Monmouth, this wasn't a Roman amphitheatre at all. In fact, Geoffrey said that King Arthur was crowned in the town and that this huge spherical structure was actually the remains of his round table. I mean, clearly the man's an idiot. Right, I've been yearning to get a bit of outdoor painting done, and I'm learning that in Wales, you strike while the iron's not hot per se, but not raining. And I have to say, what an incredible spot for it.
Only had one miniature left to paint in this portion of the army, and that was the Guardian support platform. A little hover dolly that carts around their heavy weapon. Just nice and relaxing to start off with, getting a solid green base coat on it. Whilst doing these rather tedious preliminary steps, I could take the time to reflect on why I did this project for this holiday. A lot of my channel is about other games, and I must admit, I do have my problems with the Warhammer 40,000 rule set at the moment. I'm not going to get into it. There are plenty of channels better than I, or at least more persistent than I, who will talk at length, and indeed make a living out of, complaining about Warhammer 40,000. But it is legitimate to wonder why I'd spend time and money engaging in a game whose rule set I'm not particularly interested in. I've always loved the world of Warhammer 40,000. It's what I grew up with like so many wargamers, and the Eldar specifically. I've been playing this army for more than 2 decades and have very fond memories growing up with them. From playing my brother Chris's orcs when I didn't really know what was going on, to playing my friend Chris's orcs. When I think about it like that, actually, not much has changed, but they're all very fond memories. Whatever's going on with GW and the rules, I will always find joy in Warhammer 40k. Anyway, after that misty-eyed rant about toy space elves, we were off to the barracks itself. These are incredibly impressive structures that give a detailed floor plan of what a Roman barracks was like, although some of the stonework is replica and not original. It was one of only 3 places where a legion was permanently stationed in Britain. It was a vital asset as Rome struck west into Wales. The barracks was a major military centre right up until the Welsh tribes were fully subdued. After that, its importance did dwindle, and the remains now are not a full legionary barracks, but the town still hosts a huge amount of Roman history. Back at the fan, the work continued to use the same decal trick on the support platform. I was now starting to really panic about how much I had to do. I'd still only purchased a few of the miniatures I'd need to complete a 1,000 points army this holiday, so I still had a whole nother set to go that I'd not even bought yet, let alone started.
Okay, you'll note that I'm painting over the thorn pattern that I sketched in on the right hand side. Now, I was tempted to pretend that there's some kind of artistic reason for it, like, oh, it'd be cool to have this kind of asymmetric pattern. The truth is I just can't be arsed doing more thorns. Not right now.
I then just had to finish off the greens and the non-metallic metal grey of the engines, and finally I was done with this section of the army. That of course meant the exciting time had come where I needed to buy new miniatures. And that's always fun because it's the illusion of productivity, like buying stationery. So after a quick trip to Firestorm Cardiff, South Wales's premier wargames vendorium, I was stocked up on miniatures, which we'll get to in a bit, and I bought new spray paint, because the Games Workshop one was shoddy at best.
So here we are in the Brecon Beacons, heading from the south coast of Wales up towards Snowdonia. Now, I've sort of finished my Autarch and my Guardians 12 miniatures, which comes to a total of around 215 points, which means I've got 785 points left to go. Now here's the bad news. I've had 2 weeks in which to paint the 215 points. I now have 5 days in which to paint the 785 points. Now, obviously I've constructed a way of doing it in which I only have to paint 6 models. Now the good news there is that's only half the number of models that I've already had to paint, so pretty good. The bad news is one of them is the size of a small dog.
That's right. To complete this challenge, I decided that the strategy was to buy fewer big models. And the Aeldari have no bigger plastic kit than the Wraith Knight, a giant mech piloted by twin Aeldari, one dead and one alive. I then bought a box of 5 of their little brothers, the Wraith Blades. And so, with a sense of excitement and extreme fatigue, I headed north. On my way to Wales' highest mountain, I found this beautiful little spot to stop off and build my new toys.
So here we are, right back at the start. My God, I've never begun 2 separate projects from scratch from one of these trips before, and we're going to start with the beast itself. I've got to be more hobbily productive than I've ever been in my life.
Yep, even after 20 years of hobbying, I still find it extremely difficult to recognise my own limitations when it comes to speedy painting.
The last time I opened a Wraith Knight box was just over a decade ago. It is a thing of exquisite beauty.
Whilst I did have a hell of a lot to do, that and many of the other hardships of these holidays, like having to carefully manage your food and water, not having a lot of space or routine access to a toilet, all that melts away when I set up, for free, somewhere like this, and just spend the night hobbying. Complete and utter relaxation. I know it's a grey day and this isn't exactly the kind of shot that goes viral on Instagram, but even after all these years, I do find there's a genuine magic in being able to wake up to a view like this. After a basic meal of, soup to be honest, I was ready and fueled up to blitz out all this building in one evening. After all, time was now firmly against me.
What a disgusting noise to put in a video.
That's the worst possible time, Pete. It's the worst possible time.
The building was done. A good start, but we only had time for a brief rest because there's a hell of a lot left to do. The next morning there was time for a quick game of fetch, and then we were back at it. With the white and green bits both sprayed, it was time to assemble the last little bits of the Wraith Knight.
Right, final component to go on is the butt plate. And I've always found it quietly amusing that they gave the 50-foot alien death construct a butt plate. But there we go, fully assembled. I guess that's the hard bit done. I mean, it's not, but it's good to tell yourself that. The question now, of course, is how do I travel the big guy? The little guys can get magnets and go in the box. I've got no solution at all for him. I would strap him into the passenger seat, but the dog's in there. I'll just have to tuck him up in bed and hope I don't sit on him.
With Nighty tucked up in bed, we were back on the road for the final outward trip, eventually arriving in the Eryri National Park, formerly Snowdonia, and at the end of the road, the town of Llanberis. And Wales really does have an uncanny ability to show you every season's weather in the space of a 10-minute drive. This town is considered the gateway to Wyddfa, the tallest mountain in Wales. Apologies to Welsh people in advance for my pronunciation. Previously a bustling industrial town built around its giant slate mining operation, it now features the National Slate Museum, which sounds awful, but I don't slate the Slate Museum, I rate the Slate Museum. It is excellent. It is nestled on the shore of Llyn Badam, and in this picturesque valley in the Eryri Mountains. I set up right on the waterfront to spend the evening tackling the greens on my wraithy monstrosity. Neither layering nor glazing were cutting it on surfaces this big, so it was time to wipe out the big guns. Blending. Just endless, endless, endless blending. It took all night for it to even start to take shape. It did make it pop, but I also kind of started to understand those people who go on and on and on about their airbrush. The next day, we went on a sort of practice hike before the mountain itself, to the slate mines, where Welsh industrialism has left a giant scar right through the heart of its most beautiful countryside. And I took with me the materials I'd need to base my new miniatures. At its height, this mine employed 3,000 people and required its own hospital. It's left behind a rather haunting but really quite spectacular place to visit. The scale is breathtaking, as is its panoramic viewpoint.
and one of the most incredible panoramic viewpoints I've ever come across. This historic slate mine has also set up a handy little hobby area. It's thought of everything. So what I'm going to do here is just test paint some of those little crystals for the bases. Now spray them up.
There was no trick to this, I was just slathering these crystals in this contrast blue paint, basically just a thick wash. I was going to re-highlight the edges, but you know what? Given they're just basing materials, I think with this one step they look fine, and I could move on. Besides, I needed to get back to the van to start the second trek of the day, the big one, up the mountain. I chose to follow the Llanberis trail, which unsurprisingly starts in Llanberis. It is very much the easiest of the trails, but by the end of this adventure I needed a break. What I didn't quite anticipate was how easy it would be. It's shadowed right along the trail by the mountain railway. I'd been sorely tempted to hop on and just claim I'd climbed it. And as I saw it pootling on past, I did start to have regrets.
You know, I think the train is actually a fiendishly good business model because they offer you the opportunity to go up for 30 odd quid and you refuse, you think you're going to be good and do the walk instead. And then they run it past you over and over again on your way up because the track runs essentially parallel to this path. So you're tired and sweaty and your legs ache and you see people just trundling past in style, getting all the same views as you. It'd be like if you were in standard class on a plane and to punish you for not upgrading, they just live stream business class for the entire flight into all the TV screens in the back of the headrests. Yeah.
I found myself being able to walk this one without any trouble at all really. I didn't have to take the frequent breaks and I didn't feel like my heart was going to explode. The hardest bit was actually reaching the beginning of the trail as the road was very steep.
So far it seems like, yeah, the windiest, but also the easiest of the three.
That ease did give me the space to simply enjoy the magnificent views, although I do wish it was a bit less windy.
Our path now takes us along this really narrow ridge with the clouds being blown up the sheer rock face. It might be the most atmospheric vista I've ever seen. It's incredible.
Unfortunately, the peak itself wasn't so atmospheric. Unlike Ben Nevis, it's not a plateau but a proper peak. And unlike Ben Nevis, it was covered in building works and was very windy. It was cramped and a bit uncomfortable and, to be honest, not a very fun place to hobby. I did try. I set myself up and got my miniatures out and got ready to do a bit of basing. I'd put some muddy texture paint down on the bases the night before, and so now, to give them a cold dirt effect, I was dry brushing a light grey on top of that.
Hello. Oh, this is chaos. This is chaos. I can't.
I'm going to be perfectly honest, that's all I managed. 3 miniatures with a light sprinkling of grey on their bases. I just took some time to enjoy the view, all the way out to Anglesey in the distance, where twice the Romans fought the Druids, and are described by Roman historian Tacitus as being scared stiff, a rarity for the professional soldiers, before battle commenced. They then committed heinous crimes, butchering the locals, and destroying the sacred woodland groves. For us, however, we've got other things to think about. With the third mountain conquered, I had a couple of days only to finish the entire paint job. That was your intensely condensed whistle-stop tour of 3 days of work. To get it done, I treated myself to a fancy campsite where I had my first real shower in quite some time. Then we were heading east, back into England, and to a great little wargaming store called Battlefield Hobbies in Daventry, where I could finally put my new army through its paces. I might have spent a bit of money on this pre-painted terrain, but it will make things look extra snazzy. I was also feeling a bit bad about bringing a Wraith Knight. Such a giant unit in a small points game might be considered a bit of a dick move.
Cool. Yeah, so this is my, well, I thought it was going to be 1,000 points.
Yeah.
It's actually 900 because I bought 2 units of Guardians.
Yeah.
And then promptly lost one of them from the other unit.
Oh, right.
So I only ended up painting 1. So I'm actually at 900 points.
Okay.
Also, I'm missing a Wraith Blade. They're 170 points.
Right,
That's 170 divided by 4. Well, 880 divided by 4, I guess, would be a number.
45.
There you go, very good. So,
Yep.
so I'm sort of down 40 points there.
Yep.
So I've had to make it all up,
Yeah.
and the only way I could do that was with a Wraith Knight. So it's still not 1,000 points, but I had to. Sorry.
Well, you know what? You.
Oh, okay, great. Well,
So in happy coincidence, I'd be playing Chris's Space Wolves with Imperial Knight in support. I know I didn't get to 1,000 points and have therefore objectively failed this challenge. However, I was pleased with how the army was looking, and it was a bit of a magic moment getting them on the table for the first time. Now we just had to see if they could pull a win out the bag. Being realistic, it was likely to come down to whose knight came out on top. Chris's superb looking army included a unit of intercessors, a unit of aggressors with a captain in Gravis armour, of course his big old knighty boy with thermal cannon, thunderstrike gauntlet and rocket topper, more intercessors, and some actual wolves tucked away at the back there. Our mission was essentially to capture and hold the buildings on the table. Just a reminder, as always, my miniatures are assigned to Patreons. The higher tier Patrons have more chance of getting assigned each miniature. In this battle, whosever miniature comes off best is going to get one of my Battle Camper mugs. The Autarch is assigned to Chris Lloyd, the Guardians to Darren, the Wraithblades to Jake Pollard, and the big unit Wraith Knight to Alan Cameron. As battle began, the Aeldari went first and surged forward onto the objectives. In the open, they'd be happily wiped out by the Space Wolves and so would hunker up behind this bunker here. The Knight, however, needed no such protection and stalked out into the open to stare down the Imperial counterpart. My shooting was mightily ineffective, and in Chris's turn, he simply moved up to close the range. These puppers were unmuzzled, off the lead, and triggering in me a deep-seated cynophobia. I used the Aeldari Phantasm stratagem to move my Guardians at the end of Chris's move phase, trying to huddle up into safety. But I couldn't hide them all from the Knight, nor could I protect them from it. It drew first blood, eviscerating 3 of them.
Yeah.
Before the infantry promptly killed the rest. It wasn't looking great, but if my Knight killed his, it would turn it all around. We won't have to wait long if Chris makes his charge.
okay, so what do you need?
It's 10 inches.
That's a big charge.
Chris's disappointment ended when he remembered that a 9 succeeded because that gets him within engagement range. I intervened with my Wraith Blades. The decisive encounter had begun. And, almost as soon as it had begun, it had ended. In one fell swoop, Chris's Knight brought my Knight down to 2 wounds, and he promptly ran away. And by ran away, I mean ran headlong into Chris's captain. If he was going to die, I want him to at least take a few of them with him. My Autarch then used his warp jump generator to advance on the intercessors by the generator, who promptly overwatched and killed him. In the combat, I managed to kill only 1 aggressor in what was a continued poor showing for the Wraith Knight. Chris's Knight then fought next and killed 3 of my 4 Wraith Blades. That was a suboptimal development. My one stroke of fortune was remembering that my Autarch had the Phoenix Gem to come back to life, and so he continued with his charge against the intercessors, something which seemed to take this guy in particular aback. But the inevitable happened. The wolves chipped the last couple of wounds off Wraithy. Then, to rub salt into the wound, my enigmatic Autarch, who had lived and fought for thousands of years, who had martial skill beyond human comprehension, was killed by a pack of dogs. Chris's Knight then took the coward's way out, falling back from combat with my single remaining Wraithblade and allowing the rest of his army to open up with a fair amount of Daka. Inevitably, my Wraithblade succumbed. So ended the first crusade of my new Baal-Tan Eldar, doomed by bad luck, incompetence, and being 130 points under. And so an epic adventure comes to an end. I think the winner out of my army for my Patreons has to be my Autarch, although the rest of the army certainly set a very low bar. That means that Chris Lloyd is the winner of the mug. Thank you so much to the Patreons who've stuck with me. This video comes after a very long delay. I hope you know just how grateful I am. And I have a new video coming out for you very shortly, which will be out for the general public a few weeks after. I'll also be using the money I've raised through Patreon for a 3-week Euro road trip in March. As before, all my miniatures are assigned to Patreons, and the higher tier you are, the more chance you have of having miniatures assigned to you. Patrons also get behind the scenes, music, a blog, and early access to the videos. Although I'll be frank, I've not done enough recently. All that's left to say is a massive thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back with new Middle-earth strategy battle game miniatures in the Highlands in a few weeks' time.